You're listening to the Mental Money Podcast, the show that shows you how to master your mind to maximize your money. This show is for people who love to watch their bank accounts grow while shifting their relationship to money. Without further ado, let's get these insider insights from today's leading expert. Okay, this is Natalie. You are listening to the Mental Money Podcast, and today we have with us Kristy-Lee. We are continuing our series on entrepreneurship, of course, because that's what the podcast is about, but we're also continuing our series on employment and understanding how to fit employment into our businesses. So Kristy is coming on with us today to help us navigate that entire world in that space. Thank you for being on, Kristy.
Thank you so much for having me, Natalie. It's great to be here and joining you.
Yeah, of course. So this is a fully loaded topic. I recently did a post on TikTok and I was asking people who are in the workforce what they would want in a workspace or what they would want in an ideal workspace. And the comments were very similar. They said they want to be respected. They want a livable wage. They want, what else did they say? They want not to be micromanaged, have unnecessary meetings, soft deadlines, like a lot of the same answers. So today you're going to have to kind of help us unpack all of that, because for the newer entrepreneur who doesn't really know how to create a work culture or even begin to unpack all of those requests and try to make the team member as happy as possible, galvanize a team that wants to work and wants to contribute to the company and run a business that's successful at the same time. You got a tall order on us today, Kristy-Lee. So please help us understand. First of all, tell us a little bit about your background and then how you got into this space to begin with, and then why we should be hearing from you as far as like entrepreneurship and the HR relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big area, the whole employment thing. So we do have a lot that we could chat about today. But my background is I've been working with businesses on all aspects of their people management for over 20 years now. I originally studied psychology at uni, and like most people, somehow ended up in a job that I didn't plan to get into, which was in a recruitment agency as a professional recruiter. And what I found was my psych background, my understanding and interest in human behavior and what was important to people and, culture and fit was something that I could just read really intuitively, largely because of that background. And what I found out was I could get the fit exactly right for a business, but if the processes beyond that recruitment were broken or non-existent, it didn't matter. The employment relationship wasn't going to work. So fast forward, I started my own business in 2006. I come from a very entrepreneurial family. My grandfather was a very well-respected tradesperson here in Australia. I grew up in his factory. I grew up around small business. So I had a real passion for it. I was always going to start my own business. And I did in 2006. And again, that relationship of that HR piece in businesses just kept fronting up. So we started a HR consultancy practice in 2010, which is currently the business that I run. So I work with small to medium-sized businesses on their people management to help them avoid staffing stress and headaches and put in place processes and practices to protect their business. Because ultimately, I really believe that you can't have a business which is successful by all the measures, but that also gives you any sense of freedom without the right team. You can be super successful on your own and make loads of money, but you have no freedom. You are tied to that business 24/7. And that's not the life I want it for myself. And it's certainly not the life I want for my clients that I work with. I believe there should be a sense of freedom from your business running your life. And the only way to get that is with the right team. And that's what I help people do these days.
Right. No, that's great. So I've noticed that you're saying people management versus human resource. Could you tell me why there's a distinction between the two?
Look, I think HR and human resources is a very corporate term. It's a very big business term. And I think it comes with a lot of sort of misconceptions and expectations. And I think a lot of people that have worked in corporate as well don't have a particularly positive view of human resources and HR, because that department sometimes hasn't always looked after them or has been a function of the business that isn't all-encompassing and looking after everything that they want. So And I find it's a term that small businesses and entrepreneurs don't necessarily lean towards because it's not something that they think matters in small business. But really all that HR is looking after your people and ensuring that your people are doing the best for the business at the same time.
Right.
And so there's lots of different terms that I use to refer to that, but I really see it as anything to do with the people in your business, who you bring in, who you keep on, how you look after them, how do you motivate them, how you manage them, all of those bits and pieces. But yeah, I really find HR is something that a lot of people feel is a very corporate, big business term, and they don't necessarily resonate with it as an entrepreneur or a small business.
Right. You know, what's interesting? I feel like human management or human resources, whatever, or people management, human resources, whatever we call it, is such a big topic, such a big, important piece, because it's so difficult to manage people. Like there's so many different personality styles. There's so many different work styles, work ethics. You know, some people don't necessarily come to work. They come to work to collect a paycheck. And like, some people want to work more quietly. Some people want to work in a group. Like some people don't know how to work in a group. You know, like there's so many different dynamics that you're navigating at every single turn. So can you give us like maybe 6 or maybe 5 high level considerations when we're looking at people as a I don't even know what to really call it because it's just too much to capture. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I talk about a concept that I've created called the people pathway as the journey every person takes in your business. And it's an acronym, so I'll run through it. Firstly, there's planning. Plan who to bring into your business, when to bring them in, what sort of person, all of those things is always underpinned by planning. And as entrepreneurs, sometimes we're not great planners. We just like to take action, but planning can be very important.
Right.
The second is employ. So employing the right people at the right time for the right roles is absolutely critical. Onboarding people. So that first 3 to 6 months is so important to really make that employment relationship stick, because that first experience really determines how long someone's going to be willing to stay with your business. So onboarding is very important. Protect. So protecting the business with the right, being understanding of the laws wherever you're based, having policies and things to protect your business interests. Leverage is the L part of the people pathway. And this is the fun part. This is where we talk about engagement and motivation and getting the most out of people. So getting the very best. And of course, exit, because everyone exits our business at some point or another. How do we make that process seamless, as positive as possible for that person and for everyone else on the team? So that's the journey that everyone's going to take. And getting all those pieces right is critical. But, you might want to focus on just employ because that's the new bit for you and you want to know how to employ people and that. So you might want to focus on one at a time, but that is the journey. And that sort of encompasses that whole HR people management space is that journey, I think.
Okay, got you. So when is the right time to bring someone in? Like, like you mentioned, if we don't do it, we end up becoming the bottleneck of our companies. So when do you think is the perfect like formula or critical point for us to say, okay, it's time. We have to pull the trigger. Someone has to come in and take over.
Yeah, it's a great question. It sometimes depends on your risk, aversion or risk tolerance level.
Right.
Some experts will tell you want to have 3 months of the salary or the wages in the bank just to make sure, and you're all safe. Others will tell you to hire before you think you're ready. And I probably sit somewhere between the two, but I definitely think if you are stretched or if you are not enjoying aspects of what you're doing, because in the beginning, you're doing everything. And you are definitely doing things that are not in your zone of genius and sometimes not in your skill set. And we have this misconception that we think we should learn it all, rather than hiring someone who's going to do it better, faster, more efficiently. And so I would sit down and map out what you want to be doing in your business and what are the bits you want to start to offload. And in the beginning, that might mean a couple of hours of a VA's time or a contractor's time and not a full employee situation or even a casual employee situation. But once you start to delegate those tasks out, you will start to see how much time it frees you and how much time it actually takes to do from a professional's point of view. So certainly if you are stretched, you can't grow because you are so busy, like you're maybe having to turn away work, or you just cannot get to the place you see you want to get to, that is time to be employing. You're feeling those growing pains of feeling overwhelmed, like you're spinning all the plates and something's about to collapse any moment now.
Yeah.
Or you find yourself doing things that you absolutely dread. They're not in your skill set and they're almost holding you back. That is a time definitely to start employing. And I think start small is a good way to start, because then you can get accustomed to managing people, to having people to delegate to, and it starts to build your confidence as a manager as well. So even if it's 4 hours of a VA's time a week or a part-time or casual employee, if you're at that stage, then definitely start there and then you can ramp it up.
Yeah, no, that is a perfect segue into my next question, because I was in that position where I was one of those people who, instead of hiring out, I would try to learn a new skill set to try to now become a new cog in the wheel. And it did not work. Okay. So to remedy that, well, it helped because I understood what the job required once I finally outsourced it. But what ended up happening was I realized that whenever something needed to be done, I shifted my mindset from, am I going to do it, or how am I going to do this, from who's going to do this? And that mindset definitely shifted. And also just thinking about what I needed to be done, and then having a really clear understanding of what needed to be done so I could articulate and communicate that to someone else. And that definition became a rubric or a guideline or an employee handbook in some way. So could you talk to us about maybe some other mistakes or common mistakes that you see entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs do that they could avoid, something along this lines, whenever they're trying to get someone in to the door?
Yeah, look, there's a few key things that I definitely see happen. The first is, I just need someone just like me, like a clone of myself, to come into my business and do the exact same things I do.
Yeah.
That is probably the biggest mistake you can make on a few levels. One is then you have an expectation that they are like you, and they're not like you, because you're the entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs have a very unique approach to business, to life, to how they work. And employees or even subcontractors do not have that same approach. They're very different mindsets, and that's totally okay. And in fact, it's really good because you need those people. But if you have an expectation of them that they're going to approach this business just like you, you're actually setting everything up for failure, because they're never going to meet that expectation, and they won't stay, and you'll be disappointed and frustrated. So it's going to be a disaster in the end. So don't try and create or look for a clone of yourself. That person does not exist, and you're only setting everyone up for failure. So that's a very common one that I see happen. Another is, just as you've alluded to, not being clear on the scope of works that you want done in that role. As clear as you can be, it doesn't have to be perfect, but as clear as you can be will set everyone up for success. So if you can create some kind of role description or outline of what you're looking for, what's critical to success in that role, is really important. So I start by a bit of an overview, like a couple of paragraphs or a couple of sentences. What is this role actually responsible for? And then I'll get into the detail, like listing out tasks. And that helps me get clear about the boundaries and the expectations, which is important. But it also means when I go looking for someone, I've got something to compare to, because really often I see entrepreneurs go looking for someone to maybe do a little bit of marketing or a little bit of finance, and they're not clear. And so then they end up hiring the wrong person because they haven't been clear about what they need. Because let's use marketing as an example. There's so many different types of marketing skill sets and marketing approaches and experiences. If you're not clear about which one of those you're looking for, you're going to hire someone that's got a different skill set. So getting really clear about what you're out there looking for is very important. And the third mistake I think I see people make is not being really clear about their values that they want these people to align to, because values are what helps us create culture in our teams. And what you will find is if you hire someone that does not share the same values or closely aligned values, they're never going to work out and you have lots of tension. So it is really important to understand what your core values are and to look for people that align closely, that don't have to be exact, but certainly are not opposite in a values set sense, because there's going to be constant tension. And no matter how technically brilliant they are, they will not work out long term. So that's the third mistake, people just not being clear on understanding their own values and what sort of culture they want to create in their business.
Right. I've heard the value alignment is important. Could you give us an example of like value alignment or misalignment just for context?
Yeah, absolutely. So your values will, as an entrepreneur, dictate your company's values. They kind of go hand in hand. They might be slightly different personally to what the business looks like, but they will be really important. So for me, one of my values is honesty. But how I approach that is very specific, in that I feel I have a sense of obligation almost to help my clients by telling them what they need to hear or need to know, even if it's not what they actually want to hear. Because sometimes in my line of work, that means a difficult conversation and it might be quite confrontational. If I had someone come into my team who didn't share that value and didn't feel that sense of obligation, that they had a sense of, real, obligation is probably the right word, to inform people of things they can see they need to know and therefore would hold back and not give them that information, it would be a misalignment of values in my business, because they wouldn't be doing the highest service for our clients and helping them achieve what they need to achieve.
Right. Yeah.
So those kind of values. Other businesses have values which are fun. And if you hire someone who just isn't that into having fun at work, there's going to be a values alignment there, misalignment there. So it's being really clear about, and that can be sometimes hard work to do, to get that articulated nicely, and it can change over time, of course, but it's getting some sense of clarity. If you're someone that loves to communicate in person or over the phone, in verbal communication, and you hire someone whose natural default is always email or always written, there's going to be tension there. So it's even at those little nuance levels.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay. Thank you for that. So the next question I had for you was, as far as like the person themselves, are there certain skill sets that just historically or statistically prove to be good team members that we should look for?
I think the common ones that, are pretty universal are reliability, because someone who is reliable tends to be reliable in every sense of the word, not just in terms of showing up on time, but reliable to get the job done, to own up to mistakes and those kind of things. So reliability is certainly one. Someone with a really strong moral compass to do the right thing is always important, I think, that can listen. Yeah, listening is probably the other one. Listen to views of others, and listen generally, because that you want them to listen to instructions and so forth. Other than that, often it depends on, your business, whether you need someone that's quite gritty in nature, someone that's going to persevere above and beyond. For me, someone that takes responsibility and accountability is essential in any business, because no matter what you're doing, I think that's really important. And they're probably obviously honesty and integrity, that would go without saying, I would say, but they're probably the fundamentals that you're always looking for in any employee, no matter what position you're putting them in.
Okay, understood. No, that's very fair. I think that's pretty much the most common answer across the board that we've gotten so far.
Yeah.
The only qualm I have about that answer, because I understand it from a very broad sense, but you can't quantify that in like an interview process or even through the workplace engagement. So are there like certain things you should look for? I mean, I know you're not testing people to test their integrity. You're not, someone can present as someone who's honest and forthright, but how do we quantify that in a way that's like, or identify it so that when we're in the interview space, we can say, okay, this is the characteristic I'm looking for, versus just kind of like, really guessing. It's a guessing game in any other way.
Yeah, for sure. So 3 things that I would definitely do. In the interview itself, I always ask what we call behavioural-based interview questions. And that is asking someone to reflect on an experience that they've had in their previous work life that is an experience that they're going to have if they come on board with us. And I'm asking questions that are very open-ended and looking for a real-life example. And what I'm looking for is not the fact that they've done this thing before, done this task or this project, but I'm looking for how they articulate their thinking process. And I will then follow up by asking them what went wrong, what went right, what would you do differently next time? And if they say to all of, and I'll ask a series of those kinds of questions, if they constantly say, I wouldn't do anything different, everything was perfect, they're not self-aware enough to have honesty at the foundation. There is always something we can learn in our experiences that we can take to our new roles. And that self-awareness, to be honest, in an interview and say, in hindsight, I probably would have done X, Y, and Z differently because now that I could see that that would have stopped that from happening, or that would have yielded a better result, or it would have simplified things. It doesn't matter what the reason is. It's that sense of self-awareness. And if they can't give some examples of real life experiences, that's always a bit of a red flag. Do they not have the experience they've listed on their resume? Have they not actually done this work before? So you're picking up on threads of patterns of behaviour when you're asking those kinds of questions.
Okay.
The other thing I ask in interviews regularly is why they left almost every position usually listed on their resume, because again, I'm looking for patterns of behaviour in that process. If they've left 4 jobs because of their boss was mean, or there was a personality conflict, or they got bored, there's a common denominator here, and it's them. So they're going to get bored in your role, or they're going to have a conflict in your workplace. So looking for those patterns of behaviour helps to pick up on that level of integrity and honesty. The second thing I do is I reference check verbally every employee that we're considering hiring. Now, that in different places around the world might be a different practice, but certainly where I am, it's very common, because a statement of service tells me nothing. A written reference could have been written by anyone. So I pick up the phone and I contact their previous employers with their permission, of course. I'm always looking to speak to their previous manager, not their previous colleagues, who will always say lovely things, and ask those questions. I ask every referee, did you ever have a reason to question their honesty or question their integrity? And I also ask, would you rehire them in the future? Because that will always tell us. And if I've got particular concerns, I will load in specific questions into that reference check outside of the norm. So they're 2 things I definitely do. And the third thing you can consider doing to get a better read of this person's general work styles, approach to work, and personality is to do what we call a psychometric assessment, or a personality test, in other words. Obviously from my psych background, I love those things. I use them all the time. You know, I find them fascinating and always actually very, very accurate. And it can just give you a read of this person's approach to work, not to necessarily make a hiring decision, but how would you manage this person? Are there any red flags here that might see them clash with your other team members or clash with you? So they can be just very insightful tools to use when you're assessing people for suitability.
Okay. So what are some tools that you've used? Like what assessments?
Yeah, great question. Look, there's tens of thousands out there. So I definitely suggest finding one that you like the look of. One of the most common ones is called DISC, Personality Profile. You can get free versions done online. You can I like to get a professional to run the ones that I do. And I like DISC at the moment because it's very simple to understand. And you can create common language in the workplace when everyone's done a DISC assessment. You can say, I'm a D, I'm an I. You can sort of start naming your own behaviours. And it can also help when hiring, knowing that this role is best suited to a particular type of personality. Very cost effective. And I just find them very easy to digest as a report, which is always important. Colby is another that I've got clients that use. Gallup Strengths Finder is another. Some people are even leaning towards using Enneagram in their recruitment processes these days. So that's not one I've used, but I actually do have a client that uses Enneagram as well as Gallup Strength Finder in combination as their recruitment selection choices. So I think they're looking at Gallup Strengths from a work perspective, Enneagram from a personality perspective.
Right.
But there's loads out there. And I just jump online, do a couple of free ones and see which one resonates with you most, because there'll be some that you read and think, oh, that's not my style. Or, but for some people, Enneagram's too complex and they find it challenging. So that's fine. Pick what works for you. But whatever you choose, just use it consistently so you've got some comparative data as you move forward.
Yeah, no, that makes plenty of sense. Yeah, I've personally done the DISC analysis before, and I was surprised by the results. But it was
really?
I was like, I didn't know I was like this, but that's good to know. And I tried to apply it in the workplace, and I think for the most part it works. I don't have anything to compare it against. Like you said, it would be more of like a comparative thing. So I'm not sure, but yeah, it's really interesting. So I like that you guys use some sort of metric to kind of like at least establish a baseline, not necessarily base your entire operation off of this, but establish some sort of baseline for sure. Okay.
Absolutely. And when you do something like DISC amongst your team, and I use it actually in team building activities quite a lot with my clients, you can then have a common sort of language and it really helps the team to understand each other a little better. I did run one with a team late last year, and they were a team that really was struggling to understand why certain team members were communicating a certain way. And it really just unlocked a lot for them to say, oh, I need to be more direct with that person in order to get the result, or I need to just smooth the edges a little with my communication because I'm coming across too abrupt with that particular team member. So it can create a whole lot of better awareness of our own preferences and how we can communicate better with each other too.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. No, that's definitely helpful because communication is a big piece.
Absolutely. Yes.
So another question that we had is, how can entrepreneurs effectively manage their employees' performance and provide feedback, especially when they don't have a lot of experience in that area?
Yeah, this is really good and really important. I think we forget that leadership and managing people is actually a skill that we can all develop. Yet almost everywhere in the workplace, you get thrust into leadership roles with no training, no upskilling, often no mentoring or coaching, and you're just expected to sort of figure it out on your own, which is kind of really unfair. Right. So we should be, a little kinder to ourselves as entrepreneurs, that this is something we need to learn, and everyone can learn it. And we, constantly can refine our skills in this space. Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest mistakes or challenges I see entrepreneurs particularly make when it comes to managing performance and providing feedback is we tend to be sometimes very bad at setting boundaries for our team, and we kind of in an attempt often to be the ultimate boss and to be super flexible and keep people happy, we don't set boundaries, or if we have them in our mind, we don't clearly communicate them. Yeah. And then we're very bad at upholding them when things start going wrong. And what happens when that happens is someone will do something that is just a tiny bit outside the boundary. Let's use turning up at work on time as an example, because it's an easy one. Mm-hmm. They will maybe usually arrive 15 minutes early, get themselves sorted and be productive at their start time. And over time, that starts to creep, and they're just on time. They're sort of starting their work a little later than usual. They're having a chat, having a coffee before they're getting started. And suddenly it's 15 minutes later than their usual start time before they're doing anything. Mm-hmm. And then we react. We react in a big way often because we're really frustrated and really angry by this change. But when we do that, all the employee sees is us reacting to what happened today versus what happened yesterday, which might be a matter of 30 seconds in time in this scenario. So they think we are massively overreacting because that's all they can see, that we're reacting to what we did yesterday was fine. What we're doing today is not fine. So there's a great quote, it's one of my favorites, and it says, you get what you demand and you encourage what you tolerate. And that's the really important part. If we're tolerating something, we're actually encouraging it to continue. Right. So it's on us to set the boundaries and to uphold them if people are going outside of them. And that is about being really prepared to have sometimes difficult conversations. I think what we forget is that it's really important to be clear with our people. They want to know what's expected of them and they want to know how they're going against those expectations. Yet our default is to not tell them because we think we're being micromanaging or mean, or we don't feel very comfortable to have those conversations. Right. So when we're managing performance, we need to be prepared to have those conversations in a really honest but kind and respectful way. Mm-hmm. So setting boundaries, upholding the boundaries, and being prepared to have conversations are all critical. I always like to bake in regular performance reviews into any team that I've got, because then you've got a forum already set in place to have these conversations. So you don't have to make up a time, but don't wait for the formal review if something's going wrong, because that will be a surprise. To have them straight away. And to make it easier, don't do 12 monthly reviews because it's too long to remember what happened 11 and a half months ago in performance. Do them quarterly. It's nice and short and sharp and shiny. You can say, right, what did we achieve last quarter? What went wrong? What went right? Let's triage that. And what do we want to achieve next quarter? We're getting them refocused again on the next quarter. But it is something you definitely have to actively do as an entrepreneur and a manager, is to bed in performance management and be prepared to manage on the fly, rather than thinking, right, I've got a review in 2 months. I won't raise this issue until then, because it'll just keep, rolling along and getting worse.
Yeah, no, for sure. I have a colleague who was having an issue with her staff mates, right? And she's frustrated because she's saying that there's a level of misunderstanding with what the task of the job needs to be done, or what the job tasks are. So I told her, unfortunately, that means that you're responsible.
Yes.
And there's a misunderstanding, and the fish stinks from the top, right?
Yep.
But not only that, there's a lot of skills that were not being met. So I gave her, because we're literally in the same business. So I gave her the sheet with this, which is a review that we do. And whenever we have a client that complains about something or a skill that wasn't met, we just have someone who has more seniority go out and review that skill. And if the person can't meet the skill set, they can't do the job. And that's grounds for termination. And it gives her one more thing to do. So it just sounds so much more daunting. Or now it means that you have to hire one more person. But it's just like, do you run the risk of always having to possibly have your employee possibly harm your client? Or do you hire one more person to make sure that the skills are being done effectively? So that's really interesting that you're mentioning that, because that's literally last week. I called her like a couple of days ago. And it's not something that we think about as far as baking in those kind of little systems, but we even have to systemize how we work through that process as well. Do you have any ideas about how to create a system for, I don't know what the phrase is I'm looking for, but I guess managing people? Like, is there a real system around that?
Yeah, look, the approach I take is, and you can definitely systemize this like you've done, where you've got almost like I guess it's like a triage system, isn't it, in a hospital, where you say, right, something's gone wrong. Let's immediately look at it under this lens and look at which point in the process have things started to fall apart, and how can we fix it so it doesn't happen again next time. That is really important. And so doing that as soon as possible after the problem has been identified is critical, so that everyone is fresh in their mind about what's happening and why it's happening. And we can start to map out where things went wrong. So having that kind of immediate meeting where all the parties involved, from internally, get together and just workshop it. And you have to create an environment of trust in your team for those meetings to work, where we're going to get together and talk about it. There's no silly questions. No one's going to get yelled at or be in trouble. We want to fix the problem so that it doesn't happen again. So you have to create that sense of safety psychologically, that I can go to this meeting and own up that I made that mistake, and I'm not, going to be in huge trouble. There'll be a solution and we won't have it happen again. So that kind of process is definitely really important. But always having a conversation very quickly when something is going wrong is really important. And seeking first to understand what's happening with this employee is really, really critical.
Mm-hmm.
So you're very right when you said, if something's being misunderstood, the problem has come from us because we haven't been clear. Perhaps something that we thought was common sense isn't common sense to the employee because our brains work a little differently as entrepreneurs.
Right.
And things that we might have done 1,000 times over is new to them. And so we have to step it out very precisely sometimes if it's a process. So having the conversation as early as possible to say, I can see things aren't going to plan, or we had this mistake, or a customer's complaint, whatever the issue is, just straight away having that conversation. I really want to understand, and being genuine in that, I want to understand what's happened so that I can help resolve it for the future. Being really solutions focused is really important. Let the employee talk. Let them tell you what their experience of what's happened here. Maybe they say, I actually didn't understand, but I didn't want to come and ask. Or I thought I understood, but now I can see I didn't. Or I don't know why that customer's complained. I thought I did a great job. Maybe they're completely unaware what's happened. But hearing from their perspective first, and then unpacking. Okay, so what we know is this. The outcome has been this. What can we do differently next time? So again, just mapping out, even on a one-on-one basis, what can we do differently next time? And if it's a really serious issue that's maybe going to cost you clients or do damage to the business, you're going to want to keep on top of that and really closely monitor them. And that might mean giving them some more training, sitting with them next time they do that task, getting a mentor. It could be all different solutions, but not letting that problem, that challenge, that issue slide and dealing with it immediately and having a follow-up. We're going to meet again next week or next month to see how you're going with that, so that there is some accountability built in as well. It's important.
No, for sure. Okay, thank you for that. So as an entrepreneur, how can I create opportunities for growth and career advancement for my team members?
What a great question. So this is all about your business growth and aligning it with your team's, professional growth, I guess I would call it. So there's an exercise that I recommend businesses do. I call it the clean slate exercise. It's essentially mapping out your company structure in an ideal world, because sometimes as we grow our businesses, we plug people in where we've got holes or skills gaps. And over time, the structure that we've created doesn't serve us. It's not the best for the business anymore.
Right.
And if we can sit and plan that, we can start to see some progression pathways. So the clean slate exercise, in a nutshell, you're sitting down with a blank piece of paper or a big whiteboard or however you like to work, and mind map on your laptop. And if you had no team right now and the business that you have today, how would you ideally structure things? And really just from a meta perspective, what do you want to be doing? What are the roles you need? How many hours a week do you need that capacity to be filled? And mapping out the ideal structure right now. And then bringing your current people back over the top of that to see where people plug in, or where maybe you've got some gaps or some surplus, people not being fully utilised.
Right.
And those gaps start to form some of your progression planning for your people. So looking at where you want your business to grow and what's important to them professionally, and can you align those two things, which sometimes is easy, sometimes is a little trickier, but not everyone that's technically brilliant should step into a leadership role in a business. So being open-minded about what growth looks like to them. Is it cross-training? Is it setting up new systems, new departments? Is it working on new projects? Or is it stepping into a leadership role in your business? And it's going to be very different for everyone, but not making the assumption that the only way forward is to step into leadership and management roles, because it won't be for everyone, but it will be for some people on your team, definitely.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, like, let's say we're building out a new department and we have a technical teammate who's really good at their job. Maybe we can outsource an additional task of them to consult on this, creating a new system instead of having them manage the new team members.
Exactly. So particularly, I'm thinking of a team I worked with a few years ago who are in the medical field. They were promoting their best technical players into leadership roles. But what that meant is that they were no longer in technical roles. and were ill-equipped with leadership skills. And so it was creating this tension because they were in roles they no longer enjoyed. They'd zapped the technical brilliance out of the team, and yet they were lacking in leadership. So it's finding how to best utilize those unique gifts and skills that your team members have and the ones that they love using, which means having conversations with them to find out what's important to them for their career development. And quite often running an exciting project is more important to people than leading a team. But you don't know that until you ask the questions and find out what's important to them, what do they value, where do they want to see their career go in the future, and what can you map towards that in terms of what you've got available in your business.
Right. Okay. No, that makes sense. So last but not least, we're going to talk about the big whale, right? Onboarding. Can we talk about how to create an onboarding process that allows entrepreneurs to actually create a successful role for the person that's being brought into the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So onboarding, there's lots of different ways you can approach it, but I think importantly, you need to understand that onboarding is not just the first day. I look at onboarding as a 3 to 6 month period of time in the new role, because that's the period that you want. At the end of the onboarding process, you want this person to feel like part of the furniture in your business, like indispensable, and you want them to feel like they truly belong and are part of the fabric of the organization. And so it can't be just day one, because that kind of relationship and that kind of feeling of belonging takes longer than that. So understanding that onboarding is a lengthy process. There is more time from our perspective up front in that first week, especially in the first few weeks. The time commitment of us contributing to onboarding lessens, but doesn't go away.
Right.
And so onboarding, you sort of want to approach it in a few different ways. Firstly, what I commonly see happen is day one, an employee is presented with all this paperwork or a link to the employee manual and a link to all the policies, and they just said, read that, and that's onboarding done.
Yep.
Firstly, they're going to fall asleep. It's not particularly interesting work to read a policies manual on day one of your new job. And secondly, they won't be absorbing anything because they're not feeling settled yet. So yes, they're ticking a box, but they're not in a mental headspace that this is all going to sink in just yet. So there are some compliance things that you definitely want to do as part of onboarding, but they're not the first or most important thing. The first and most important thing is to make the new employee feel like they belong, to start to get them feeling comfortable and, psychologically safe, I guess you would say, feeling that sense of belonging. So I always start the onboarding process with getting to know the place, like the geographic workspace, if they are in an actual physical workplace, not working from home, obviously. So that might mean site tours. It might mean, if your type of business goes out and sees people on site, or there's various different physical workplaces, I would get the employee out to as many of those as possible very early on in the onboarding, because it starts to give them a sense of, this is how we do things around here. They are looking at how people are interacting. They're meeting lots of people, so they're getting a feel for the culture. And they start to put pieces together just mentally in their own mind. Okay, that's that person. That's what they do. This is how those roles relate. So, for example, you might have a manufacturing business where you've got a factory, you've got an office, you've got a showroom, your reps are out selling the goods. I would, in the first week, have the new employee spend some time in the showroom, spend some time in the factory, going out with one of the sales reps, so that they are getting a real feel for the sense of the workplace, and not getting into the role straight up, but getting a feel for the place and the people in the place, because that's the important part. Now, if you've got someone working from home, no problems, but jump on a Zoom call or jump on even FaceTime. And you show them around your workspace, get them to show you around. So you're getting, again, that sense of a feeling of belonging in the workplace. So I start with the place and then the people. So who are they working with? Who are the closest relationships? And get them spending time with those people. And that might mean sitting alongside them, sitting in on meetings that maybe they won't sit in on usually, but just to get them to get to know everyone a little better, and to get everyone to get to know them as well. So rather than just going straight in on read the policy manual and here's your job and off you go, creating that base level. Now, for some roles and some businesses, that might be just the first day. For others, it might be the first week or first couple of weeks that you're spending in that time investment. And then, of course, you're starting to get into the role, getting them to get to know their role, and depending, again, on whether there's someone that's doing some training with them or they're coming in just, and they're ready to go almost. But even if they are coming in pretty much ready to go, just remember that how you do things might not be the same as how they were done at another workplace. So there is still going to be some integrated training you're going to need to do there, but getting them to know their role and then starting to obviously perform the functions of their role, but don't expect them to be an expert on day one or week one. You want them in the swing of it by the end of month one, but maybe there's still some learning to be happening in months 1, 2, and 3. So that's going to depend again on the type of role, but being conscious that expecting someone to be productive at the end of week 1 is most likely not the reality, and it's going to take a little bit more time. And of course, build in all those compliance things. They do need to know the company policies. They do need to sign some documents. That's all very important, but don't lead with that. Bake it in and do it in bits and pieces so that they have time to digest it and to really let it sink in. And if you can plug it in where possible with the relevant areas that they're learning about, it's going to just sink in a whole lot better. But create an onboarding process that really allows enough time for people to feel that sense of belonging and then gets into the nitty-gritty of the roles. And absolutely have some checkpoints and markers in those first 6 months. So I would be reviewing with the new employee at the end of week 1, at the end of month 1, and then monthly through to the 6-month period, when then they should, in almost every role, be ready to be pretty much on their own at that point. But giving them that very close attention for that first 3 to 6 months, because you're going to pick up gaps. You're going to pick up, oh, we missed that in the training, or they don't have that skill that I thought they had. We need to get them upskilled, or something's not sinking in. We need to figure out why. If you're not doing those regular checkpoints, almost mini reviews, then you're going to miss things for sure.
Yeah, no, that's really valuable. Thank you for that, Kristy-Lee. So if someone wanted to get a hold of you, how would they go ahead and do that?
Best place to reach me is you can contact me via my website, which is peoplepoweredbusiness.com.au. You can find me all over all the socials under Kristy-Lee Billett, so Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. You can feel free to reach me on any of those social platforms and listen in to my podcast, which is the People Powered Business Podcast.
I love that. Thank you so much, Kristy.
No problems. Thank you so much for having me. I could talk about this stuff all day long, clearly. So I really appreciate you having me here on your podcast.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for listening to the Mental Money Podcast. Please go ahead and remember to subscribe, but don't hoard all of this good information for yourself. Share this information with someone that you know could use it, especially if they need a shift in their mindset or someone who would love to have more money. So until we meet again, remember, like Uncle Snoop said, keep your mind on your money and your money on your mind.